All right, everyone. Starting to see the numbers jump up here. So I know people are hopping over from their last session. I am going to take this time very quickly to just go over some rules. I'm sure you saw these in your first session, but if we have anyone who's joining us later in the day, we'll review very quickly, and then we'll kick it right over to this awesome content. So just some reminders for today. Please keep your camera off. This ensures that our panelists are front and center and that there are no distractions. Important thing to remember here as well is that this panel is being recorded. So if you turn your camera on, your face will be in the recording. Just a fair warning for everyone. Microphones are disabled throughout the session, and that's where the chat feature will come in. You see the little chat bubble here. Feel free to ask any questions of the panelists throughout the session, and we will save those for our Q&A section towards the end of this panel. Perfect segue. During our Q&A session, if you do have a question that you'd like to ask out loud, perfectly okay, please use the hand raising function and we'll allow you to unmute, ask your question, and then go back on mute. I can say from experience, the chat is the best way to ask questions, or if you need help, you get stuck technically, I'm here to support as well. I am going to kick it right on over so that we don't cut our time too short to Scott and Ben. I'll let them introduce themselves and we'll get started with the panel. Thanks, everyone.
Right. Perfect. Welcome, everyone. My name is Ben Smock. I am the Director of Development with Canopy, and with me is Scott Koloms. Scott?
I'm here.
That was the cue to introduce yourself, my good friend.
Oh, hi, I'm Scott Koloms. I'm the founder and CEO of Canopy, and also the CEO of Facilities Management Services, which is a public benefit corporation and B Corp certified.
Perfect. Perfect. So our session today, Scott, is the good business movement, importance and relevance of impact data. And I know you have significant experience with FMS and what we've created with Canopy. So I'll turn it over to you to begin the conversation, and I'll do my best to monitor chat with, oh, let's see here. Allie is asking us to turn our cameras on. Mine is on, I believe. Allie.
Mine's on as well.
Okay.
We should be good now. Was sharing the PowerPoint still, so we should be good.
Perfect. Great. Okay. We are being seen. So Scott, I turn it over to you to begin the talk.
Okay, great. So the intention here is to keep this fairly informal. I'm going to talk for hopefully a brief amount of time. Ben will have to keep me in check because I have a way of going on. But really, I wanted to talk maybe for 5 to 10 minutes max, and then really open this up for discussion, because what we're going to be talking about is such a new way of thinking, and it's part of a paradigm shift that is happening in business. So exciting stuff in terms of that we're on the forefront. The things we'll be talking about, we're on the forefront of a fundamental change in capitalism. So I'm going to start off with a sort of the larger movement, what's happening in the world, and then dig into some of the discussion around data and operationalizing values and measuring impact within a for-profit business is specifically where I'll be coming from. But there will be some more expansive topics about, just what do we measure and how do we measure these things. So in terms of data. So the larger movement, perhaps most of you are familiar with what's happening in the business world these days around what we call at Canopy the good business movement, but shows up in a number of different ways in terms of public benefit corporations, B corporations, triple bottom line businesses, mission driven businesses. There's a lot of different language around it, which is always indicative of something being talking about is businesses operating in a way, building into their core job, building in a social or environmental mission or a focus. The idea being in a general level that businesses need to take on the responsibility of improving our world from a social and environmental perspective, and social meaning both externally, neighborhoods, communities, and internally, meaning the employees, vendors, all the stakeholders internally with the business. And we're seeing this show up everywhere. You see it show up in buy local movements. You see it showing up in advertising, where so many large corporations now seem to be highlighting the good that they're doing in the world. And briefly, what's driving that is a shift in consumer consciousness. People are paying attention to who they buy from. Folks are paying attention to who they want to work for, and they're holding companies accountable to ethical behavior and their influence in the communities and the states where they are, and into the world in general. So, without going into any sort of macroeconomic stuff, it also speaks to, well, I guess I am going into it, but speaking briefly on it, this also speaks to some of the larger issues we're seeing in the economy and in capitalism in general. And for instance, the increasing wealth divide that's happening in America, and this speaks to that, addresses that, and sort of tugs at this need for us to rethink how businesses are running. So that's the macro level. But to get into it, I'm going to talk a little bit about Canopy. So Canopy is a local nonprofit that is working to make Kentucky first in the good business movement. So what we've created is an online platform that is designed to guide companies through this process of more fully integrating good into their business. And specifically what I'm talking about here is we focus on 4 things: external impact, which includes both social and environmental. And also, again, think of the social as internal as well: employees, vendors, all stakeholders. We also look at culture, which attacks that internal piece there. And we look at leadership and governance. So what we're trying to do is get companies across the state to adopt a more intentional model of incorporating good into their business, and also to get to the level of sophistication where they're measuring that good and they're chasing goals and looking at outcomes. So as we began creating this, we realized a couple of challenges in this. If we're going to operate with data and we want the state to be able to see the data around what these companies are doing and how they're doing it, one of the immediate challenges we were faced with was, how are we going to collect data? What does that look like? And what are we collecting? And one of the first pieces was really, how do we get to outcomes? And we could wrap our head around the idea that companies were going to initiate programs, they were going to do different ways to operationalize, contributing to their neighborhoods, contributing to their state, contributing to the well-being of their employees. But really, how do you get to outcomes? How do you know if those programs and things you're doing are working? Well, we decided we weren't going to answer that. So that could be something we decided we didn't know. So that can be something we really discuss in our chat here in a minute. But I am going to share with you, what we did do. Well, first we realized we had to come up with buckets to sort of, if we were going to show data and we were going to share data, we had to come up with sort of buckets to organize that data. And for companies in Kentucky, we came up with what we call our Canopy social and environmental impact categories. So what happens is that companies, in terms of external impact, identify the spaces where they're doing good, and we measure what they're doing. And the fundamental data points that we're looking at in these cases, what we narrowed it down to, what we're going to measure is the number of people affected by the programming, the number of participants, the number of dollars spent to create the programming, the number of volunteer hours that fall under one of these social and environmental impact categories, paid volunteer hours, and the dollars donated philanthropically within these impact categories. And we felt like that was, while it's not getting to necessarily outcomes, we felt that it was very important and a nice step in the right direction, because what we're essentially doing is getting businesses to focus their good in particular areas because we intuitively felt and were quite sure of that this is going to increase the likelihood of there being successful outcomes. So just to give you a couple of examples of our impact categories, opioid and drug addiction. And by the way, we are a Kentucky-centered organization, so our impact categories, some of them are very broad, they capture, but also some are very specific to the needs within our state. So opioid and drug addiction, food access to reduce hunger, public health and healthcare, public spaces and housing, crime and violence, economic equality and poverty, social equality and human rights, racial equality, education. And then on the environmental side, we look at air, waste, water, energy, and conservation. So those are our categories. And essentially what happens is businesses will select the areas of focus, and then they will literally enter the programs that they're doing that fall under those buckets. And then they'll go right to those data categories I mentioned, how many people participated in the programming, how many dollars were spent. And when we get into air, waste, water, energy, and conservation, the environmental side, we're measuring specific things in terms of, how much waste was produced. There's a certain level of sophistication for some of these. How much waste reduction were you able to accomplish in a year, and you have to measure your output. And obviously, a lot of companies aren't going to be able to do this. This isn't required for all of them. But in terms of energy usage, very simple metric. You look at your LG&E bill and you come up with a strategy, and you see you actually accomplish something with that. That one's a little bit easier to wrap your head around. But those are the data points we're looking at. And what we're, one way to think about this that when I'm noodling on all this stuff is, lately I've been really thinking about the idea of operationalizing values is one way to think about this. So, how do you, if you're going to say that your mission of your business, or you hold a value for clean air, or you hold a value for employee wellness, how do you see if what you're doing is successful? How do you see what metrics are you diving into to see if you can accomplish this? Now, quickly, this is Canopy certified, but what the data we're also trying to do is from the very beginning, when a company enters the program, we're getting what you might call demographic and core information around the company, including profit, revenue. There's a employee survey that has to be filled out annually, very simple tool to where we get a sort of a net promoter score around employee engagement. We're looking at turnover. And the idea is, for us, is that we're hoping we're going to find positive correlations as companies become more sophisticated and truly acting on these values or missions that they have, and that we see a positive correlation in the wellness of the business overall, so financially and in all the ways. So that's the work that we're doing, and all kinds of getting ready to roll this out. It's an online platform. We're super excited about it, and for me, as a B Corp and as a public benefit corporation, when we really started embedding our social programming into our business, one of the challenges we faced was, okay, what data are we going to show that this is successful? Because we set goals in terms of, in the beginning, it was pretty easy. It was how many people are participating. We did a brief survey. Were you happy? Would you recommend this program to somebody else? Yada, yada, yada. But for us, what we were really interested in next phase was, okay, so if we're making the argument that a business is going to succeed, be more successful, and thrive because of this way of thinking, building this into an organization, what sort of metric, how can we tug that out in data? And, the best that we came up with so far is, now we're doing surveys that ask questions like, did your participation in the, New Roots Fresh Stop Marketplace make you more likely to ... You can sort of fill that in, make you more likely to recommend FMS to a friend to work. Did it make you more likely to, work harder and those sorts of things. So now we're really trying to get to data that shows a correlation between the well-being of the employees and how effectively they're operating within our structure, and that relationship to this social and environmental good that we're doing. on a macro level, Canopy is looking at, and give you some data points just to have some fun, within the Canopy certified that we're looking at. We're looking at things like what's the ratio of the lowest paid worker to the highest paid worker. How many of your employees, what percentage of your employees make above a living wage? These sorts of things that we're trying to measure internally, and of course externally, we already talked about. That's those social and environmental categories out in the world. What are the programs you're running? And how effectively are they being executed? But I guess to start with, and I know Ben has related questions, I'm really, the challenge around, getting to those impacts, and, this is still so new. What do we measure? How do we show the correlation between the execution of social and environmental good and the success of a business? How do we collect data that furthers those arguments? And we can get as into the minutiae as you want, like exactly how would that show up for an organization, or we can talk about it on maybe in a broader way. But I'll turn it over to Ben, because I think he's always more succinct than I am. I think he has these questions sort of outlined. So go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So the first one, and it is what you're alluding to, is from our good friend Ben Reno Weber, discussing the awesomeness of the data that you've put forth, and then really, and I think in a specific way, how does this connect to a business's bottom line, in terms of consumers, customers, and employees?
Are you asking me? Are we asking for folks to jump in?
Asking you, Scott.
Yeah, so that goes back to what I just talked about. That idea of we have to begin measuring what we consider maybe the more traditional success measures of a company, which would be revenue growth, which would be job growth, which would be profitability, which would be employee engagement, those sorts of things, traditional measurements that we're all used to. But then figuring out a way to correlate those to the increasing sophistication around incorporating a mission, a focused mission, and really creating programming externally in communities and doing that good, and trying to notice the trends that as things get more, as a company gets more sophisticated around this, are they seeing the traditional business metrics moving in a positive direction? And then on a smaller scale, getting down to those employees that participate in these programs, and getting data from them around those sort of more likely to sort of things. So, because Facilities Management Services has a Working Your Way Home program where we're getting 50 people into home ownership over the next 2 years, and your participation in this, did this make you feel better about FMS? Did this make you more likely to recommend somebody to work there? And we're really trying to tug at ways to get that correlation Ben's talking about. Is what data can we come up with that will show this correlation between the social and environmental good and the success in terms of traditional measures?
Thanks, Scott. And please, anybody who is listening in, feel free to drop a question in the chat. I have one for you, Scott. So on a larger scale, you've gone over how this social and environmental impact can show up in regards to success for your business. On a larger scale, and because Canopy is Kentucky-centric, what can this collective impact mean for our state?
Yeah, so one of the things that the Canopy certification will produce for us, which is very exciting, and I'm trying to actually pull it up here. I pulled out all my notes here, what's actually built into the program. But one of the things is the impact reports that will be automatically produced for both companies, and then the Canopy-wide impact report. And so what we're going to be able to do, and how this can help with the state, is we're going to be able to, based on those buckets I talked about earlier, we're going to be able to show statewide level, of the 120 Canopy certified companies, they put $3 million in programming to deal with opioid and addiction recovery. That they put 17,000 hours into tackling violence in neighborhoods and communities. And that sort of data obviously is going to help us in terms of an organization get funding, but it's also going to show what is happening across the state. And one, I mean, not to be too soft about it, but the idea that it's going to inspire others. Now, again, what is going to be key to that is the business argument. So also the data we're collecting is we're going to be able to show that the average Canopy certified company grew this much in revenue, or added this many FTEs, or had a employee engagement score of this. And that year over year, as they continue through the program, that the employee engagement score went up. So we're going to be able to show, again, hopefully, that this work does yield traditional business benefits. And in terms of statewide, we're going to be able to show how these companies working in concert, perhaps in smaller pockets. So imagine if we had, 8 companies in the west end of Louisville that were focusing on the reduction of violence in those neighborhoods. And, at that point, obviously, we'll get more expansive and start sharing data with different organizations and seeing that perhaps, we notice that in an area where companies are zeroing in on a specific sort of social good, that there is a boost, that we do see an accelerator in positivity. So.
Thank you, Scott. We have a couple questions in the chat here. One from Ronald asking, how is Canopy itself utilizing IT workers, and perhaps an opportunity to elaborate on our platform itself?
So currently, our IT workers are outsourced to a local company called Untitled. They're the ones that are developing the platform for us, and which will be completed in a month, and we'll begin rolling that out in May. But what we do know is in the short-term future, we are certainly going to need folks that are able to update that as needed. This is a dynamic platform. Our inquiry points will change over time based on the needs of the world and what's happening in our state. And as companies, as capitalism changes. So we'll need people that can function in terms of that. And then, of course, we'll need people that are pretty good at data analysis and coming up with reports that we're not thinking of and looking at the data in fresh ways. But at this moment, we're so in on the platform creation.
Great.
But we always will take volunteers.
We will always take volunteers. Absolutely. So we have another question here from Janice. Janice is curious about what's being done to gain public access to the internet for cities in Louisville after the initial fiber optic plan a few years ago did not work. So that might be a little bit outside, but Scott, if you have any thoughts on Janice's question, I want to make sure that we address. Yeah,
so again, I guess the first thing I would say about that is I could see that being a social good, that a couple of companies might try to tackle that problem. I will say that I wish Ben was still on here, but there are a number of different organizations that are working on that specifically. Ben and I were in Bingham Fellows this year, and one of the 4 projects was that very issue. In terms of us actually, the organization actually doing that isn't really in Canopy's work per se, but there are a number of different organizations that are doing that. Now, one of the cool things too is once we get a group of businesses, once we have Canopy certified businesses, we will put out challenges based on what the needs are in the community. So we'll push out something in, say, the first quarter of 2022 that says, any companies out there that are interested in focusing on accessibility, internet access in Louisville, let's champion that, and let's figure out how we're going to measure any sort of successes and what we're doing, and we'll highlight that. So I don't know if that really answers your question 100%. It's a little bit outside of our what we're doing, but certainly is necessary.
I think you addressed it well. The ability to convene based on challenges that arise in our city and throughout our state. And we have several minutes left, Scott. And in this call, we have business leaders, we have innovators, we have civic leaders. I, on a daily basis, and many others do, feel your passion and excitement for what's on the horizon with the good business movement. And so what would you like to convey to the participants on this call about how they can be part of this movement?
Well, I mean, first I want to, since this is data for good, I think that I wish that everybody was able to talk here, because it's a really interesting topic to me now. And it's this idea, and I think even nonprofits struggle with this, right? Is how do you measure outcomes, right? So, we can measure how many people participate in a food access program that we have at FMS. We can measure how happy they were with it. But how do we measure whether that's increasing the physical health, which is one of our two pillars, physical health and financial health for our employees. Financial health is a little bit easier, but in terms of these sort of things, how do you actually measure that? And how do you assess whether the program that you've created or the initiative that you're doing is truly beyond maybe making an employee happy to work where they work? Beyond that, are we really getting the outcomes that we're after? And that's a tricky question. And even going beyond that and asking, is that really a role a for-profit company should have? Is it enough to get participation, to get people to show up and to offer these things? And how does that all work out? And that's some of the stuff that we're all noodling on right now. In terms of Canopy, I would encourage you to, if you're curious, get in touch with Ben. We are going to be rolling out this platform. I think we have upwards of 29 companies that are committed to enroll in the Canopy certified program starting in May. And I see a question here: why create a certification instead of a score such as an ESG score? Well, to me, that feels like putting the cart before the horse. Going into a small or mid-sized company across the state of Kentucky and going right to the idea of you're going to go into an ESG score skips a hell of a lot of steps. My organization, as we move towards becoming a social enterprise, there's a whole lot of stuff we had to do along the way, and the certification, as I said earlier, is a guide that moves companies through the milestones to get to where they can actually have an ESG score, where they can actually have data around this good that they're doing. But there's a whole lot of steps along the way to get there, and I think it would be a difficult project to just push companies to producing a score. But there's a whole lot of work that needs to go on the way.
Absolutely. All right. We have a notice from Josh here. I think the panel session is reaching its conclusion. So before I give you a moment for final words, Scott, I just want to remind everyone in this meeting. So the Ben that he was referencing there at the end to get in contact with is me. There's a lot of Bens in this conference, and in the good business movement, Ben Reno Weber being one. So if you're interested in learning more, check out our website, canopyky.org, and I will also put my email in the chat box here. So super interested in making connections and elaborating on what Scott has shared with us today. Shout out to Katie Ryan. I see you on here lifting up the great work. So Katie, thank you for your partnership. And Scott,
and to be clear about Katie Ryan, when I was talking about the idea that the Canopy certification is a guide, Katie Ryan has created a number of the curriculums that are part of the program. I think we're upwards of 18 of them right now. And, that is a core piece of the platform is, we have these categories where companies, they want to learn more about maybe diversity, equity, inclusion, or they want to learn more about ethical leadership, or they want to learn more about wastewater reduction. That we have curriculums that correspond with inquiry points and things that we're asking companies to do. So, while we call it a certification, I like to call it it's a guide. And yes, we're going to put a stamp that companies are putting in the effort and are doing the things that they need to do. But to Eric's question earlier, we realized that across Kentucky, small and mid-sized businesses, they're not ready to jump on, for example, the B Corp certification where they have to hit 80 minimum points, that level of sophistication isn't there yet. And it's not just Kentucky. I mean, this is a new thing across America, and we really realize that we have to teach and guide as we take them through the process. So it's not simply answering a bunch of questions and you get a score.
Perfect. All right. Well, I think that about wraps it up for us. So I just want to thank everyone who joined the conversation, and I've put my contact information and Canopy's contact information in the chat. So please reach out to us, and thank you all for being part of the Data for Good session today.